Welcome back. We're really excited to introduce Luella Hall, Building Confidence in Refugee Children through the gift of quilts. And she's had a pretty amazing experience. So we're really excited. Get your box of tissues out, wrap yourselves in your favorite quilt, and get ready to hear from Luella.
Luella, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in a little tiny town in Star Valley, Wyoming. And I lived on the Idaho side of the state line that divided Idaho and Wyoming. My address was Wyoming, but we lived in Idaho. We lived on a farm, and we didn't have much. And I was very small. I just didn't grow. And when I got to school, the kids made fun of me. They teased me relentlessly because I was so little. And my eyes were bad. And so my grandmother, bless her sweetheart, made me a quilt. And that quilt was made up of pieces, it was a double wedding ring. It was made up of pieces of material that had been my mother's clothes when she was growing up. And that quilt changed my life. Literally changed my life, because it didn't matter to me anymore that I was being made fun of. My grandmother loved me, and I had this beautiful quilt that I could wrap up in, and I knew I was loved. And that's what started my love of quilts and doing what I do today.
You mentioned that this quilt was something, as you were struggling with some of the self-confidence you had briefly mentioned, this quilt helped seed in you kind of this passion. And I know there's part of this project that you have that's ongoing now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this project that you've kind of started on this endeavor to do?
I moved to Salt Lake about 5 years ago, and I could see people cold on the streets, homeless people. And so I started making quilts, and I'd just give them to them. If I saw someone that looked cold, I'd give them a quilt, because I wanted them to stay warm. And then I discovered that some of these quilts were being traded for drugs. And so I felt that I needed to change my efforts to some place that really needed them and that they would use them the way they were supposed to. So I discovered that West High School here in Salt Lake has a large international student population, refugee student population. And I called the advisor there and asked if I could make quilts for them. And the quilts that I make are pieced. They're not just thrown together. They're nice, warm, colorful quilts. And with each one of them that I give to the school, I put a note with it. I name the quilt, and I put a note with it and say why I named it that and what I hope it will do for them. Because I want these quilts to keep somebody warm when they're struggling, like I struggled when I was a child.
That's pretty amazing. I know there's been a lot going into this. Maybe just briefly, how long have you been working in providing quilts in this way?
I started years ago, actually. I was a school teacher, and even before I started teaching school, I was a single mother, and I could see kids in my children's school that were struggling with self-esteem, struggling with school, just so many things that kids struggle with. And I felt like maybe a quilt for them would do what my grandmother's quilt did for me. And that's when I started. Then in my classroom, when I could see somebody who maybe was being bullied or who was struggling academically, if I could anonymously give them a quilt, it changed their whole attitude. They became better students. They interacted with other people better. It was almost like a miracle.
Do you remember the first time you gave one of those quilts anonymously to one of those children when you kind of had this come to your mind, and what ended up happening, or what you think might have been part of the result of that?
There's one student that I gave a quilt to, a young man. He struggled. He really, really struggled. And he never knew who this quilt came from, but it was hung in a restaurant in New York. And with this, there was a little note that said that this quilt came from someone. He didn't know who it had come from, but that quilt had turned his life around, had given him the courage to go on and do what he wanted to do. And I just thought it was amazing that after all of those years, that he acknowledged that quilt and what it had done for him.
Is there a comparison, and I'm again, from what you shared, that's part of the reason that you've decided to do this. Again, you and, back at school, and your grandmother again had given you this quilt. It sounds like you're finding that there's correlations like this that are kind of happening throughout your experience in giving these quilts. Are there any other experiences like that you're aware of, that you've been able to hear of?
From myself?
Yeah, for sure.
I would see quilts wrapped around kids at football games out in the cold. I would see quilts at basketball games. They never knew where they came from, but to see how they embraced them, what it meant to them, that it wasn't just something that they received and threw away, but it was something that in a way changed their life, like my life had been changed.
I'll tell you, just hearing that in general, that feels, and it sounds incredibly inspirational. I have not had a chance to participate in something like that. I would believe that there's, and I know that when people do this, you're not looking for the gratitude in return. That's why you're doing this anonymously and why you're providing this in other methods. Is that an encouragement? Is that something that helps? And maybe share with us how that type of an experience continues to push you forward to do and continue the efforts that you've started.
There are so many young people and families struggling. They need someone that lets them know that they're okay, that they can make it in this world, that they're worth having something nice. And I will never know who these quilts go to. I never will. I don't care. It gives me this inner warmth that I just can't even begin to explain. And when I'm making a quilt and putting all of those fabrics together, my thinking is somebody is going to look at this and say, they cared enough about someone else to put all this effort into it. That's what matters to me.
That's wonderful.
They're worth it.
And I do want to kind of maybe come back. One of the things you mentioned when we started, and I know we're going to show the audience a few different quilts that you've worked on. Maybe talk a little bit more about, again, I know a lot of them, and maybe are all of them pieced, are partial some of those pieced? Tell me a little bit more again about this process you're putting into your quilts that you're giving away.
They're not all pieced, but every one of them's different. There's no two. I've given them 68 to this point, and every one of them's different. For instance, I did one that had an African print, and I found a pantograph that was tennis shoes, running tennis shoes. And so I put these big tennis shoes all over this quilt, and then I named it Racing Across Africa. because that's what it looked like. That's what it made me think of, racing across Africa, moving forward, because somebody will get that. And the note that I put with it is encouraging them to race forward in their life and accomplish what they really want to do. That's why I name them. That's why they're all different.
Yeah, sounds beautiful. I can absolutely see, coming up with part of, when you've looked at that and put part of those shoes. That's wonderful. And now again, you're mentioning that you're putting on the back of them a little like a saying or some kind of a tag. Maybe share with us a little bit more part of your purpose and what your thoughts are as you go through naming each quilt as far as the inspirational piece.
I had someone donate a piece of fabric to me that was yellow flowers, and it had some black in it. And I quilted it with just something bright and pretty. I don't even remember the pattern, but I named this one Good Morning Sunshine. And then the note that I wrote with it, I told them what I had named it, and that the reason I did was because the yellow made me think of the sun coming up in the morning, and that I hoped that when they used that quilt and woke up in the morning, that they had been able to sleep nice and warm and could look to the sunshine for a new day. And that's what I've tried to do with every one of them.
That's wonderful. Now, I know that this has been, I'm going to say, a journey, and I know that you, in your mind, I believe you're continuously pushing forward with this. Is there an end? Is there a goal? And there probably isn't an end, but tell us a little bit more about your continuous drive. Where are you thinking you're trying to go? Is there, how many more? Is there something you're looking to do this year? Is it the next couple years?
When I started, my initial number was 100. And then I found out that they had the year before 186 refugee students. And so I decided I had to make at least 200. And hopefully by the end of December, I've reached 100. I do want to do at least 200, but I'll never quit. I'll never quit. As long as I can keep going, I will.
That's wonderful. I know that you've gone through trials, and I do feel it's absolutely amazing for you to put yourself forward in this way. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about the current initiative? I know that you've mentioned, I think you said you're at 68, is that correct?
That's right.
And you're hoping to get through maybe 100 this year. That is an amazing amount. In fact, one of the things I would like to kind of briefly, I always joke with our quilters is, I call them UFOs. How many unfinished objects do you have in your closets, right? All I know is from 68 to 100, that's a lot of finishing objects that you'll be doing with those quilts. Right now, I know that you're giving this to a specific, is there a group of people right now that you're kind of focused on? Maybe share that a little bit more. I heard the word refugee come out, and then not only individuals as far as a potential child in the school, but families. Would you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
It's the International Refugee Student Association at West High School. It will also encompass the Family Resource Center at the high school. I don't know that I'll ever reach a point where they're not needed there, but if I do, there are so many places that need quilts. So many people whose lives can be changed by a simple quilt. Another thing that's kind of interesting, though, I've done a lot of quilts and given to different people and challenged them to find a name of a family member to go with each piece in that quilt. And that's been a really fun thing to do as well.
Maybe explain that a little bit more.
I do genealogy.
Okay.
Everybody has lots of people in their families,
right,
that we don't know about. And so when I've given a quilt to a young person, and I love young people, and so when I've given a quilt to someone, and it's related to family history, I tell them that every one of these pieces has a story with it and a name, and then challenge them to go out and find out about the people in their family, because most of them really don't know. And it's been quite interesting. One young man was from Africa, and I called it the Burning Ring of Fire. It was all done in reds and blacks.
Beautiful.
And I quilted it with flames, red flames. And he went back into his family history. He had never done anything with it before, but he went back in his family history and found where his family had come from in Africa. It was amazing to see the stories, hear the stories that he shared with me, because I had challenged him with that quilt.
That's absolutely amazing. So again, that's something I hadn't heard of as well. Another challenge that you've had with a quilt to help people, and you're inspiring them, not only giving them what is partly warmth, and those are through some of the anonymous ones that are bringing them together with their families. Again, going back to your youth, one of those that would potentially build confidence and hopefully a future. Your story about the individual, like you said, that had put that up in there, you said it was a restaurant, was the case. And you're also now sharing that you're also inspiring people to look at genealogy by how they would look at a quilt. Did you have a chance? Did they ever do anything to show you any of the names at all, or?
Oh yeah.
What was the reaction when they came to you? I'm curious to hear that reaction, because you put a challenge out in front of them, and then they responded, obviously. But maybe tell me a little bit more about that response when they kind of came back to you.
It was interesting. One young girl came back, and her parents were divorced, and she had never really known her father. Wanted to. She was she was 16 at the time, and when I made this challenge to her, she decided that maybe that was, and I did it in front of her mother and grandmother, and she decided that was an opportunity for her to find that family that she didn't know about. And when she came back and told me things about cousins that she had no idea about, aunts and uncles that she didn't know about, just to see the light in her eyes and see what that meant to her, and it did even to her mother, which was really interesting.
Is that one thing I'm thinking as a family? In my mind, what I think about is, in this world, sometimes there's a lot of potential chaos around us. A lot of happiness and a lot of joy, but I think in this world that's become so busy, I would just think myself, and being able to expand who I know that's there around me is of great strength as well. And it sounds like partly she's finding that there's more than just her, and there's more than just her family, that it's much larger than that.
Right. And the fun thing is, one young man, Tim, such a sweet, sweet young man, and after I gave him his quilt, he said, "Now will you help me find the stories? Will you help me find stories about them? Will you show me how to find those stories, find that information?" Which I thought was, because he was on his own.
Yeah.
And I just, how exciting, because then not only do I get to see the joy of them with this quilt, but then I get to see the joy of them finding out about maybe a third great grandfather, and that third great grandfather liked to do the same things that he does.
That is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
I would go back to your very first piece. You talked about, again, your grandmother providing this quilt, and to find out that if there was this grandchild that's continued this, I would believe that she would be just absolutely ecstatic to hear how much of a difference it makes, not only in a person's life, but if you think about this, in multiple of people's lives. So,
that's right.
That's wonderful to hear. Let me ask this question. Has there been anything unexpected or a surprise that you've seen, or what has been the most surprising piece of what we've been able to see as we've gone through this experience?
How it brings families together. And it carries on. I look at the students that I taught. The experience of having that gift given to them, changing them academically, physically. I've seen physical changes with kids after they receive a quilt. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. It sounds like, in having been a part of, and I would say anonymously in people's lives, and then also as knowing that there's been a gift, it sounds like there's been many surprising things. I'm not sure when you started, did you know that it would go down this path this way?
I did not.
And if you're continuing to move, I'm guessing there will be many more surprises that you'll continue to find out.
It lets me personally see people in somewhat of a different light, because I see some of these kids, some of these people who have been angry, they hate the world, everything is hopeless, worthless, and then they start to think, oh, somebody did this for me, I'm going to do something for somebody else. That's been a fun thing to watch. I don't know that I've seen anybody do that with quilts. I don't know that I've had a lot of my students make quilts. Even in elementary school, we always tied a quilt as a class. We put our handprints on that quilt and we tied it and we used it in the reading corner all year long. And then at the end of the year there was a drawing.
And somebody had a chance to win that quilt that's been used throughout the year. That's wonderful.
And I believe that some of those are still being used, or they're being kept.
Oh, absolutely. Outside of the one that your grandmother, have you received a quilt in any other way as a gift, or was that really the one that kind of set this whole thing in motion?
And I only own one quilt because I've given them all away.
That's fantastic. That's wonderful. That's an amazing. You have a very large heart, and obviously there's been some things throughout your life that have helped you be able to continue to move down and through this journey. You've kind of answered this in some ways, but I'm wondering if there's anything else you would like to add on how this project has changed you.
It's made me happy. It's made me. It's let me know that you don't have to have a lot yourself to be able to share it with somebody else to change their life. You don't have to give an armload. Just give something that says love.
I'm curious to know, you're doing this, I'm guessing, on your own.
Right.
I'm guessing, acquiring and purchasing the fabrics. Are people donating? Do many others know of this cause that you're doing at all, or?
Not a lot, especially not at first. I will tell you, I had a really interesting thing happen, though, not terribly long ago. I had someone come to my door, and I live in a high-rise condo, and people wear face masks right now everywhere, and people don't go visiting. And she had never been to my home before, didn't know her really well, but she came to my home to visit. And my living room was full of quilts. That's before I had made a delivery. And she wanted to know what I was doing, and looked through the quilts, and we visited for a little while. And when she left, she said that she had received a refund check that morning for $2,000. And she had prayed that she'd know what to do with it. And she said, now I know what I will do with that $2,000. And she donated that to me. I was able to buy some quilt batting, some fabrics, so that I can keep going. I've used up, as I taught sewing for years, and I'm a fabric collector. I mean, I'm a seamstress, what can I say? But I've used up most of my fabric stash. And this donation from her, it really touched me, really touched me, that she could see this vision of helping others. And that even though she was 90, she just was turning 96, and she couldn't do it, but she could help someone else to do it.
That's amazing. I do feel that, things happen for a reason. People are in the right place, or people come to know one another, or are inspired to share with others. With that, I want to ask this question, and it might be related to part of this, maybe not. What has been, or what is your biggest challenge in you continuously moving down this path to reach your goal? What would be the most difficult thing or the biggest challenge you have in front of you?
Financial. I'm on a fixed income, and like I said, I've used most of my fabric stash. I have had a few people donate fabric to me, and I have to say everything that has been donated I have used in one way or another. But that's my biggest challenge, is it's not inexpensive.
That's the truth. Unfortunately, a little bit of a sad thing. I would have told you 14 years ago, before I got into quilting, I didn't understand the time, the effort, and the expense and the cost that goes into putting a quilt together. I'll tell you, I have a much larger admiration for quilts these days. I've been the recipient of a couple quilts myself, very fortunately. One was from my wife's grandmother that was hand quilted, and I've received some from my mother-in-law. But that's a very true statement. It's not something that fabric falls into the cart for free as you're walking through a store. Hopefully, there's maybe a couple people that have looked to join. With that, maybe I'll just bring this up with part of the audience as well. And I know that we kind of haven't had really much of a discussion on this, but if you're okay, one of the things we thought we could do is put some information to your Facebook so that people that would like to connect with you, if you're okay with that might be out there in a position where they would love to help you with part of this cause and this goal. I'd like to just make sure you're okay. Is that okay? We'd like to do that, and we'll put that out there to the audience and the viewers who are participating. And then also, I think one of the other things we had a discussion on is maybe part of the Venmo account maybe as well, so if there would be somebody that comes with that. But what I would like to maybe just encourage the audience with is if you get to that spot, I know that everybody is working through their own efforts and their own gifts, and I know this is heading into the holiday season, but if anybody feels like they'd like to, we're looking at making sure that you can get in contact with Luella as part of that as well. So that's not the purpose of what we have. We really are super inspired, and I know we've had a great chance, Luella, to have you come and join us at a couple classes we've had here over the last few months, and I just think that that's been fantastic to get to hear your story. Any other last thoughts you'd like to leave us with in regards to you and what you're doing and your process?
What I'm doing here locally, there's a need everywhere. And I believe, especially right now, with everything that's going on,
that's a great point.
If you can make a quilt for someone in need, regardless of where it is or what kind it is, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be super expensive. But give, because you give that quilt, you get 100 times return in what it does for you.
And I would say maybe that's the Luella Hall challenge, is what is the quilt that you can give here, especially during this time, that will impact somebody else's life, and not only probably for the immediate, but for an extended future in their life. They think that's a great thing to put out there. You're absolutely right. Amid the time that we're currently in, and I do think that I always like to talk about quilting, that it breaches and it breaks borders, not only in states, but in countries. Quilting, a lot of people, when I talk to them, are like, oh, that's great in Utah. I'm like, well, yeah, quilting's not just done in Utah, right? It's done throughout the entire world. And so I think that could be hopefully something that we would give to people around the world as part of that challenge, and in looking at what they can do maybe to be a part of that cause, and lifting and moving somebody's life to a better place by giving them and presenting them with a quilt, a gift of a quilt.
A quilt is a simple thing, but it can make all the difference in the world in the recipient.
And I do believe that, and I appreciate your stories. I maybe would like to go back and kind of recount one of the opening things that your story started with. Here's this amazing story that we've been able to hear about a young girl, yourself, receiving this quilt, at a time where you were struggling with some self-confidence, and what that's done in order to grow into this amazing passion that has affected so many lives and will continue to affect so many lives. And with that, just again, thank you so much, Luella, for finding time to come down and spending a little time letting me ask you some of these questions, kind of putting you out in front of a lot of our viewers and our visitors with this fantastic fall festival. So thank you so much again for letting us participate and hear the wondrous things that you're able to do and the lives that you've impacted. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We would encourage you to continue to look for new upcoming information and some additional individuals that we have that are going to be participating with the fantastic Fall Festival. And from Nathan Erznosnik here at the Grace Company and Luella Hall, thank you very much, everybody, for joining and participating. We wish you a great holiday season as it comes upon us.